Frauke, ich will gleich mal bei dir was gucken. Ich glaube, ich habe da was gesehen. Darf ich mal ganz kurz?
Ich bin
Du bist
Linksträger.
links, aber du hast eine Apple Watch.
Aber ich darf doch keine Werbung machen. Es gibt auch noch
es gibt noch andere
Anbieter
Uhren.
übrigens.
Aber du kannst mit der Uhr bezahlen. Kaufst du damit morgens deine Brötchen?
Ja, also auch 99 Cent oder so. Ich kein Problem mit. Ich finde das angenehm, ohne Portemonnaie unterwegs zu sein.
Also Bargeld ist bei dir nicht mehr...
Nee, nur wenn es sein muss. Ich habe so ein paar meiner Lieblingsrestaurants, die nehmen nur Bargeld. Dafür mache ich es.
Okay, dafür machst du es. Man merkt ja, man denkt ja irgendwie so ein bisschen in der Payment-Branche gibt es jetzt auf den ersten Blick nicht ganz so viel Veränderungen mehr, aber so ein bisschen hinter den Kulissen tut sich da auf jeden Fall was. Man kann sich Bankaccounts im Internet eröffnen oder es gibt schon erste europäische Antworten auf PayPal. Irgendwie.
Oder den digitalen Euro bald, who knows?
Ja, gucken wir mal.
Wir sind gespannt. Auf jeden Fall geht es darum, wer gewinnt denn eigentlich diesen Payment-Markt?
Ja, das stimmt. Und darüber sprechen wir jetzt. Das Gespräch wird leiten mal wieder Christian Kirchner, den kennen wir heute schon von, ich glaube, 2 Talks sogar. Er ist ja einmal eingesprungen heute für uns.
Ja, vielen Dank nochmal. Und außerdem sind dabei Lena Hackelöhr, die Gründerin von Brite, Alexander Mattei, der CTO von Adyen und last but not least Phil Teixeira da Motta von Shapers. Herzlich willkommen.
So, this could easily be the easiest job for me today because we met like half an hour ago and just started discussing a whole bunch of issues and I didn't have to say a word. So I just said, why don't you just walk outside? I'll stay behind there and you just continue to talk. And it's probably going to be the best panel of the day. But, okay, I decided on asking you a couple of questions. Maybe to start with a macro theme. I think we have a lot of people interested in founding companies and what's going on in the venture capital scene. So I'd like you just to ask, how do you see the state of the funding scene at the moment for fintechs, for payment companies? We have a payment discussion right here. Given the fact that we had a drought for 2 years, and things tend to improve over the last couple of months. So I just like to ask each one of you if you think it's going to be some thawing in the next couple of months again, or if it's just like a small pickup. Shouldn't pay too much attention anymore. I would start, of course, with the woman in the middle. Lena, maybe just give us from your perspective from Brite. How do you see it?
Yeah, certainly. I would say that it's been getting better these past 12 months, is my impression. But we at Brite Payments, we did raise our Series A just towards the end of last year. Mm-hmm. And what I
Which
heard...
was called a monster round from somebody else here.
the venture capitalist has said that for the record, so I was very flattered.
As investors, we have certain words for this type of rounds, and that was a beautiful one, so well done.
Elena, just continue.
No, so it went for us, it went really well, but it was also coming from a place where we realized that the funding environment was not going to be easy, so we geared towards profitability the previous year, so in the end of 2022. And the sentiment that I got from a lot of the investors that I spoke to was that they said, look, we have funds to invest, we do want to deploy, but we do want to see solid business models, want to see a path to profitability. And I think for those businesses, there's been money in the market all along. It's just, I think, been tougher for companies that don't have quite as straight a path to a break even, at least. That was my impression.
Okay. Alex, I know you don't deal too much with venture capital because Adyen is a listed company. So nothing particular that is of interest to you, but still you have an industry view, I guess. So maybe just give it to us.
Yeah, maybe I think indeed we have a different perspective. For us, we do obviously operate with a lot of partners, you know, a lot of the companies that are kind of trying to innovate. And there, I don't really see a slowdown. I think there is a lot of things that need still improvement and innovation. And we do see it happening. So somehow, and I think it's also accelerating right now. So there is more companies that reach out to us and want to partner with us that we can help, that actually do have quite specific ideas on how to improve the market. So that's something that's, you know, I'm not even sure if I saw the dip of the last 2 years there, to be honest.
Okay.
I clearly saw that deep as an investor.
On the financing side, probably yes, but I think there were always people that really wanted to push forward.
Of course.
So, Phil, we have 3 different companies we have around here, which is very interesting. So your view from the investor's view is very interesting to us.
Right. I would probably distinguish like late stage from early stage, but the main I'm still like bearish, I would say, on the outlook for 2024 in terms of capital flowing into fintech companies and tech companies in general. That said, it's much easier than mid 2022 to end of 2023, effectively. And I think there's 2 main reasons for that. The first one is that companies had time to adjust, effectively cut back, adjust expectations of valuations, and rethink business models. And secondly, on the fund side, basically most funds have had time to look through their own portfolio, to figure out what's working, what's not working, to reassess their own fundraising opportunities, because funds also have to go fundraising. And then they start slowly but steadily deploying capital because it's their business model. They have to be deploying. So that's why I think that now you've seen like a little bit this new surge in funding, and I think that's going to accelerate, but still it's going to be at like a fraction of the pace of 2021-22, which I think is good, by the way. And to your earlier point, I think the venture is a power law game, obviously, and I think in 2019, 2021, 22, a lot of people forgot about that in the investor community. And so you're still seeing today like a few percentage points of companies, maybe 5%, that are raising relatively easily a lot of money. And typically those are certain industries, certain types of founders. And then you have the very vast majority of the rest of the market that is still struggling to fundraise. And some of them will get it done, some of them won't, but that's venture.
So we're here at the finance forward stage, and I'd really like to get your ideas on how the payment industry is moving forward. And my question would be, is there still room for innovation? Because from a private retail point of view, I think all my problems are solved. I can like make payments peer-to-peer, can make instant payments next year, and I can make card payments, online payments quite easily. Is there still room for innovation in the payment industry? And if your answer is yes, where is it? What area? Who wants to start? Lena, maybe you?
Oh, happy to.
You nodded your head.
That's because I run sort of a next generation payments company, so I'm going to have to say yes. But yeah, with all the innovation that's coming out, there's still a lot of legacy in payments, clearly. It's still fairly complex. I think if you speak to any larger merchant and you ask them about if they're happy with sort of their payment processing, they will still have a significant amount of pain points, and I think that goes for consumers as well. And since we are specifically in the account-to-account payment space, which is sort of set to be challenging card schemes and making card processing not making card processing, but payment processing overall more efficient. One of the aspects there is, of course, price. It's still relatively expensive to be processing payments. And I think there's room for improvement on that side, for sure. And on the consumer side, obviously, there's already a wealth of different choices. If you look at the German market, however, where people tend to pay with cash, for example, you cannot use your debit card online, or you haven't been able to do so in the past. Now, if it's a Visa Master debit card, it's different. In the past, you wouldn't have been able to do that. And that, I think, is also, for example, an angle that some people might choose and say that, well, we're still not catering to the full range of consumer preferences actually possible.
Alex, what's your take?
I agree to everything that you said. And I would add a few other things as well where I think innovation is still happening and it's going to continue to happen. Maybe the first one is that I think if you look at the last 15 years, a lot of the basics have been put in place indeed to solve all of the relatively obvious problems. I think what is now available is a lot of data. And I don't think that we are using that data very efficiently to ultimately kind of learn something, improve customer flows for it, maybe improve costs or whatever. I think that's very difficult for a lot of players because it's still a very scattered ecosystem. And I think that's something that where a lot of innovation, a lot of additional insights will come to. And the second is that I think for an end customer, there's also quite some improvement that needs to happen there. I think for enterprises, they are willing to invest into it. If you look at small and medium enterprises, in the past, doing payments was very, very complex. They needed a lot of different contracts, different partners, needed to plug in different systems into each other. I think that will really change. We see right now that there is a lot of investment into kind of making that very seamless out of one box. I think we will see quite something there.
Where do you see innovation, Phil?
Look, I completely agree with everything you guys said, and I especially love that standardization of data theme, because it's like there's so much data out there that I think the companies that are able to standardize it and use it sort of like in a really good manner, they can actually, it's a gold mine, obviously. Two other themes that I would probably highlight. One is, you mentioned how expensive payments are. I think cross-border payments specifically are extremely expensive and inefficient still. So we're seeing a lot of teams trying to build there. Obviously, it's quite difficult because globally speaking, like payments is super fragmented. And so it's quite a localized industry still. And the second one, maybe in the same theme, is embedded payments. So effectively, a lot of companies that haven't necessarily like had control of their own payment flows, they effectively like embedding it into their own products. So I'm very bullish about like payments innovation. And so I'd agree with your initial statement. As a consumer, you kind of feel like a lot has been built. But the two caveats are, one, you're in a fintech stage, which means like you're quite at the forefront of innovation of fintech. Like most of the population still isn't there. Secondly, I think we're constantly surprised with how much innovation, like every couple of years we see, even as a consumer. And I don't think that 5 years ago we're thinking about account-to-account payments type of thing, and we'll continue to see a lot of this, is my sense.
Some things also just don't show up, right? So 5 years ago, a lot of people would have said crypto. Nobody talks about crypto anymore in terms of payments.
Talking about innovations, we have, I don't want to, how do you want to call it, like a forced innovation, or maybe it's not an innovation at all. We have a European Payments Initiative, or WERO, as we're supposed to call it right now, which will launch this summer with peer-to-peer payments. Is it something that particularly is of interest to where you're doing a business, or what do you think of the idea in general? Do you think it's going to be a project that will have success, or you're right on the pessimistic side? I know what you said behind stage, so stick to it, please.
I can maybe give it a first shot. I think if we're thinking about innovation, what I see works best if somebody puts the consumer face first. So really thinks about, if we do something, how can we drive adoption? How do things really change people's way of paying? And these things seem to work out better than others. And I think if you look at innovation that is mostly driven by governments, I typically see that sort kicking in too late, with a little bit of a different background, and that seemed to not work very well. There were a few examples in the past where that's not the case. However, I think there is a lot of room for innovation still. I want to give one example that, if we all think about how do we pay our bills and everything towards governments, like if we get a speeding ticket, or you need to pay taxes or stuff like that, that's something that is very old-fashioned still. So if that could be innovated, and by that adoption could be driven, I think then it potentially has a success opportunity. But I think that salt really needs to be the first one, and I think that's difficult to put into the right hands.
Okay. Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think there is a strong case to be argued for a pan-European payment initiative, certainly, and there is also a need for it. But I agree. It always depends on sort of where that emerges. I think in the past, what you've seen is, if you've had initiatives that were driven either on a government level or maybe driven by larger banks, perhaps sort of the go-to-market was a slightly different approach than what you've seen in sort of larger privately held success stories on the payment side. Because ultimately, a lot of these business models are B2B first, and then maybe are B2B2C ultimately. And there, I think it's going to be interesting to see sort of how the adoption is going to be driven. From what I've understood, the peer-to-peer element also comes with a wallet approach. And those two aspects I find very interesting, because there are definitely examples where peer-to-peer has been a very successful strategy. We're headquartered in Sweden. There's Swish, which is a local bank-owned payment method, which has been incredibly successful, started out as peer-to-peer, now can be used in online shops as well. So that's worked really well for them. However, if you look at the account-to-account payment space, I think one of the beautiful aspects of it, that's an extremely accessible category, because you don't need to sign up, you don't need an app, you don't need a password. And if you turn that into a wallet, without knowing all the ins and outs of sort of what the plan is, that is, of course, a little bit harder sort of to drive adoption for. So those are the aspects that I'll be looking at, certainly, and watch and see what happens.
When we talked before, you all stressed the importance of building your own rails, the way that Brite did it, and even the European Payments Initiative had the idea to build an own scheme to get more independent from US schemes, which get like more powerful and powerful each year. I think it would have been a good idea to think big in terms of the European Payments Initiative. Were you a fan of it, or?
So just, actually, a lot of people don't know this or don't think about this, but some of the biggest, like a MasterCard, for example, in the US, is actually started by a consortium of banks. And so there's a few interesting things that have been done in the US by these types of organizations. In Europe, as Alex pointed out, like, we haven't had that level of success. We haven't had that level of regulatory push either. And we now have both this initiative and also like the harmonization of like electronic ID and etc., which is interesting for KYC. So it's hard to say if they can be successful, as you say, because of the go-to-market strategy. But at least I welcome those in the market, because it pushes for a bit more innovation, a bit more of competition. Let's see if it's successful or not. But if it is, then I think it's a great opportunity for the likes of Brite and Adyen to actually partner up. And the last thing I'd say is in the peer-to-peer space, as you pointed out, it's one of the only spaces in fintech where actually like some of the bigger banks locally, and in France, you've had some initiatives, in Spain, in the Nordics, you've had some decent peer-to-peer networks search. So it could be that it works.
Okay. I'd like to hear your view on the German payment market. I think Brite just entered the German market like 2 weeks ago. What do you tell your colleagues about the German payment market when entering it? What's special about the German market besides the love of cash? What's your argument? What do you tell them when you have to characterize the German payment market?
Yeah, I have some first-hand experience from my time in Klarna, where I was also part of launching that, and it was very different compared to Scandinavia, because obviously, because Scandinavian markets are incredibly digital, so the infrastructure is really good. There is a national ID scheme. Cash usage is extremely low. In Sweden, it's now sort of below 7%, meaning you effectively don't see cash on a day-to-day basis. So Germany is very different in that sense. We definitely see more of a holding on to legacy payment methods that have been around in the market. There's a lot of security concerns. Data protection is strong in Germany, certainly, compared to a lot of other markets. So it's a large, very attractive market that is obviously very much worth exploring and getting a foot into, but it's also a challenging market because of its very particular conditions, quite simply. And then, of course, you also have history of different payment methods, right? So PayPal, for example, is incredibly strong here. Much owing, I think, to the legacy and the connection with eBay as well from the past. That's not something that you see equally across all European markets. So it certainly has its quirks.
Okay. Phil, I'd like to have your view on that.
Look, I'm not sure if this is a boring answer. I'm not sure I can add so much more than the payments expert in the German market. I think one of the reasons why Germany is still seen as like a super exciting market for payments companies is because it's not only one of the largest economies in Europe, but it's actually one that has the highest cash usage. And so whatever initiatives you can use to drive that, and potentially, like if you drive down the costs of accepting payments through account-to-account payments, for example, you help some of that adoption. Part of it, obviously, it's cultural. Part of it is tax-related, etc. But I think that some of these initiatives are actually super interesting. And so, if you can turn one of the largest economies in Europe a lot less cash-dependent, you've got a huge business on.
How was your experience in getting here to the OMR? Were you forced to use cash at some point where you didn't want to, or did it work out?
Good question. Typically, so in Berlin, I still struggle a bunch with like paying with card. Here, I think we pay with this, right? So it's quite of a specific thing. Yeah. So it's quite innovative.
Okay, I'd like to get back to the idea where the innovation is at and what's happening in the next couple of years with the question, how does a simple payment process look like in 5 or 10 years' time? What are you working at? There's still what kind of room for improvement is there, and what might surprise us? What's different to the payment process? Let's say when I enter a supermarket and make a payment, bought like some water, some apples and some noodles, whatever, what happens then? Can you give us an idea what your vision is of the payment process? Is it something that happens in the back that's get innovated? That's what I understood in the beginning, or is the customer front end changing? What's your idea of the payment process in 10 years' time? Alex, maybe say, because that's something as a CTO, people will make up your mind all day long.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the payment experience will differentiate much more between different flows. I think in certain things it will be much more convenient than it is right now. I think we do see that already with autonomous stores where you just walk in, face recognition, you have a whatever payment type on file somewhere, you take your stuff out, technology is good enough to understand what you're actually picking. You walk out, it's being paid, you never have to do any strong factor authentication or anything like that. So I think that's one thing. I think if you look at the other side of the spectrum, I think if you look at exclusivity, for example, also there it will be a completely different experience. I think if you're sitting, let's say, in a Burberry or so, and you're paying or want to buy a very expensive piece of whatever, nobody will ask you to go to the counter over there and use a full cash register or so, but it will be very inconvenient of, here's my phone, just tap your phone on it and done deal, and, everything will seamlessly, the invoice will be sent. So I think from a consumer perspective, it will surely, become much more specific. And interestingly enough, that will have quite an impact on the merchants as well. So they will have to adopt for that. And I think that's what we are seeing right now already, that the expectation towards merchants is that they kind of take away the burden between different channels, for example, because that's not something that customers see anymore. They expect a very good customer experience from everybody, not just from, I don't know, like a Nike, like a very advanced retail experience, but actually from everybody. And that is something that will happen. Because companies like us, we try to build towards enterprises, but through partners, we kind of enable that payment experience to be available to everybody. From somebody that just has a small, I don't know, coffee store somewhere, will be able to offer all relevant payment methods and a very convenient setup where everything is built in. I think that will fundamentally change, where right now kind of running a business is much more complex.
Okay. Lena, what's your take on?
I second that to a large degree.
In 10 years?
Yeah, I think we're moving away from cash, generally speaking, more and more. Certainly some countries faster than others. I think the payment experience in store especially is going to become much more distributed. So I think standing in line and queuing is hopefully going to be a thing of the past. And then there's obviously varying degrees on sort of whether you actually, like today in Apple stores, right, where you check out with a specific person, that's sort of like a small step, but I think you could move to a process where you don't even have to check out at all, or you do it on your mobile. I strongly believe that a lot of these sort of payments are going to happen to your own mobile versus at a terminal. The amount of legacy in POS processing, I think, is incredible. I think that's why sort of it takes so long to drive innovation in that segment. And I think that's going to be sort of some of the bigger changes that we're going to start seeing the first sort of indications of over the next couple of years.
Phil, any idea?
Yeah, so I think on the back end is where a lot of the hard work needs to be put. So like, as you're mentioning, like payments reconciliation, like inventory management, etc. I think all of that by now kind of should have been solved. But as you say, it's like, it feels now that we're in an era where so many people are building towards that I feel like in the next 10 years that should be solved, and it's a big issue. On the front end, on like the user experience, I have a slightly different view. I think like this idea that it's going to become so easy, and I just think that online fraudsters are always going to get better and better. So you're going to have like a bunch of like things that unfortunately have add a bit of friction to the payments. And offline, I think a lot of the friction, call it, is through sort of like the loyalty schemes and marketing, etc. And so, like for those reasons, I think that on the front end for the user interface, in 5 to 10 years' time, you're probably still going to have like a lot of different payment options, and each one is going to try to choose their own. As a VC, I've been pitched so many like crazy and great ideas, and sort of like paying like the palm of your hand becomes like your loyalty card, and like a lot of like really cool stuff. But then actually making it happen is and not just making it happen, but actually the penetration of that becoming like 5, 10, 20% of the population is extremely hard.
Okay. Well, already approaching the end, I would like to ask you one question regarding the large legacy banks that we do have in Germany and in all of Europe. They making profits more than ever before in the last 15 years because really the interest rates really help them a lot, but still they don't seem to be too much there seems to be not to be too much interest in the payment market in general. They got rid of their acquirers a couple of years ago. They got rid of their shares at MasterCard and Visa some years ago. Are they asleep at the wheel, just watching what's going on in the payment industry? Or is it a smart idea for a large bank just to leave the payment companies with the payment stuff and Adyen and Brite and who they are, all the companies that there are, and stick to their banking business? What would be your advice for the legacy banks?
Since we work in that segment, we work quite closely with a lot of different banks in different markets. And I think the German banks, just the sheer size obviously is different. But I would say technology is a huge hinder. A lot of the systems, again, just have been around for a really long time. So I think it's not for lack of wanting to try, but I think it's pretty difficult to drive a lot of innovation in the space. And ultimately, I think that they're defending sort of other profit pools and their business models more than perhaps payments, just per se. I mean, there's like obviously lending is a very profitable offer for a lot of banks. So I get the sense that they're more focused on that for the most part than necessarily driving innovation in the payment space beyond obviously sort of basic payment processing.
Okay.
I agree. I think technology is the big differentiator right now, and I don't see any real chance for them to get closer. Also because of the way how they typically grow with buying and migration of technical platforms is quite difficult. However, I think it's really not the right way, because right now we are talking about payments, but what we are seeing in the market is that payments is more and more getting extended into embedded payments, embedded financial products, and all the banking that they're currently trying to protect, I think will be eaten away from them as well, because people will look at it differently. In the past, they went to their local bank in order to also get a terminal. In the future, they will get their banking service from the people that enable them to, earn money somewhere. So I think it's will be difficult.
First, up to you.
So I agree with most. Sort of like where I think that the erosion of the profit pool of the banks is going to take like decades, I would think, because when you're dealing with people's money, it's about trust, etc. And some of the banks will fail, obviously, the big incumbents, but some of them will continue to be more and more profitable, I think is at least my guess. From an innovation perspective, I think the downturn now in 2022 was a big opportunity for banks to reassess some partnership opportunities with startups. I think there were very little acquisitions by banks in Europe of startups before. Now they're warming up to a few of these things. As an investor, I'm seeing a lot of that. And like a few different banks have started like new complete separate payment division just to try to address marketplaces or something like that. So we're seeing a little bit of that, but I would completely agree that it's so hard like to innovate inside such a large company.
You agree pretty often. Aren't like Brite and Adyen competitors? I would expect you to have different views on that. Are you competitors? Who do you call yourself?
I think it depends on how you define competition, but ultimately we're a payment method, a branded payment method in the checkout, which Adyen isn't.
Okay.
And then also PSPs are an important sort of multiplicator in the payment industry, right? I mean, sort of essentially bigger merchants, they tend to want to have a PSP because otherwise the complexity is just not manageable. And then obviously PSPs offer a variety of payment method where hopefully Brite is going to be one. So to us, it would be more of a partnership, I think, than competition. That's my view.
Since you,
I agree again.
Okay.
Quite boring.
Since you agree on almost...
Sorry, can I just say that sort of like as an investor, I think that the adjacencies are so large that the partnership initially makes sense, etc. But if we're talking about two very successful companies, I think at some point it's competition.
Well, since you agree on so many things, I think you have to make up a decision right now. In Germany, we had that TV show that's called Nur die Liebe zählt, when you had to make up a decision who you want to form a relationship with. So I'm asking you right now, who do you want to found a company with? Which one would you choose if you have to choose one of the two other ones? I'll start with you, Phil. Who you want to found a company with?
So to be fair, I think if they were starting a company, I would hope that they would start it together and they will allow me to be the first check-in.
Oh, okay, good answer. Lena, choose one.
I was going to say, I'm going to need both, right? I need the cash and the tech. So that's sort of my CTO was my first senior hire, so I can't choose.
If you're not allowed to say with both of them, what would be your decision?
And it's Lena, because money is on the street. No.
All right. Well, yeah, agreed on pretty much things. I still thought it was very interesting insight into the future of the payment industry, where we get some innovations from the next 10 years. Maybe we'll see each other again here in 5 or 10 years and check on whatever you said. And I said, even it's late in the day, give a very warm applause for our guests from the payment industry, Lena, Phil, and Alex. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.